The text from my father arrived 3 days before Christmas. "We think it's best you don't join us this year. Some space would be good for everyone." 6 weeks later, my phone rang at midnight. My mother's panicked voice on the line explaining their mortgage payment had bounced. What they didn't know was that I could see exactly what had happened to their finances because I'd been paying their bills in secret for over a year. That night, I had to decide whether to reveal the truth or let them face the consequences of their pride. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The decorative lights on my apartment balcony cast a warm glow across my living room as I wrapped the final Christmas gift, a vintage watch I'd spent months tracking down for my father. The restoration had cost nearly as much as the timepiece itself, but after finding identical photos of it in both, my grandfather's memorabilia and my father's high school yearbook, I knew it would be the perfect gift to repair more than just a family heirloom. My phone vibrated against the coffee table, the screen illuminating with my father's name. A text message, not a call, which was unusual for him. I set aside the half-wrapped box and reached for the phone, expecting a question about my arrival. Time for Christmas Eve dinner, just 3 days away. "Eleanor, your mother and I have been talking. We think it's best you don't join us this year. Some space would be good for everyone. We'll ship your gifts after the holiday." I read the message 3 times, each review making the words no less shocking. Disinvited to Christmas. By text message, after I'd already purchased my train tickets, requested time off work, and spent weeks selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone. After my mother had explicitly confirmed our plans just 2 days earlier. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I composed and deleted 4 different responses. I settled on a single question mark, hoping it might prompt an explanation less cold than the original message. The reply came almost immediately. "It's just too complicated with everything that happened at Thanksgiving. We all need a break." Thanksgiving? Of course. The dinner where my father had interrogated my boyfriend about his career prospects, my mother had criticized my recent weight gain, and my brother had announced his engagement to a woman he'd known for all of 3 months, a woman who had subsequently informed me my career in environmental law was basically just stopping progress. I'd left early after pointing out that successful businesses didn't need to destroy ecosystems, and apparently this qualified as causing a scene. I set my phone down without responding and stared at the partially wrapped gifts covering my coffee table. Custom monogrammed leather gloves for my mother, a first edition book for my brother, a delicate silver bracelet for my future sister-in-law, selected in a spirit of reconciliation I now regretted. More than the rejection, it was the casual efficiency of it that stung, the easy dismissal of holiday traditions we'd maintained. Even through my parents' separation 10 years earlier, my college graduation across the country, and my brother's year abroad. Christmas had always been non-negotiable in the Parker family. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet. The cheerful holiday, decorations I'd put up mockingly festive. I powered on my laptop more to break the silence than with any clear purpose, navigating automatically to my email. Perhaps work would provide distraction from the hollowness expanding in my chest. The notification from Bank of America appeared at the top of my inbox. "Your scheduled payment has been processed." Not my payment, theirs. The mortgage on my parents' home had been my responsibility for the past 14 months, ever since I'd discovered the precarious state of their finances, while helping my mother organize her home office. The stack of unpaid bills and final notices I'd found hidden in her desk drawer had revealed a truth neither of my parents had shared. My father's early retirement had coincided with the collapse of his investment portfolio and my mother's interior design business was generating barely enough to cover their basic expenses. I'd set up automatic payments for their mortgage and property taxes that same day, routing the transactions through my own accounts without their knowledge. It had strained my budget to the breaking point, particularly after my recent promotion. had fallen through, but I'd managed by subletting my second bedroom, canceling my vacation plans, and working overtime whenever it was available. My parents didn't know. They believed an insurance settlement from my father's former employer was covering the mortgage, a story my father had fabricated to preserve his dignity and which my mother chose to believe despite its obvious inconsistencies. Their pride would never have allowed them to accept financial help from their daughter, especially after years of lecturing me about fiscal responsibility and the importance of self-sufficiency. The irony of being disinvited from Christmas by people whose home I was secretly financing was not lost on me. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, watching snow begin to fall on the street below. Neighbors were returning from evening activities, hurrying through the growing storm with shopping bags and briefcases. Normal people with normal family relationships, or so I imagined in my rising self-pity. My phone vibrated again. My best friend Zoe's name appeared on the screen. "Still on for Christmas Eve dinner? Marcus is making his famous roast, and I've already bought enough wine to ensure we forget all family-related trauma." Zoe had extended the invitation weeks ago, knowing my relationship with my parents was complicated at best. I'd declined, explaining I'd be at my parents' home as usual. The memory of her response, "The offer stands if anything changes," now seemed prescient. I texted back, "Plans changed. Room for one more broken family refugee?" Her response was immediate. "Always. Bring pajamas and stay the weekend. Also, what happened?" What happened? The question had no simple answer. Was it the Thanksgiving argument? My brother's sudden engagement to a woman who embodied everything my parents admired: corporate success, social connections, and conventional ambitions? Or was it something deeper, the culmination of years of expectations I'd failed to meet, choices they'd failed to understand, and conversations we'd all failed to have? "Tell you when I see you," I replied, unwilling to compress the complexity into text messages. I returned to the half-wrapped gifts on my coffee table. After a moment's consideration, I finished packaging my father's watch and set it aside with my mother's gloves. The book for my brother and bracelet for his fiancée. I returned to their shipping boxes. I might still send them after the holiday. Or I might not. That decision could wait. What couldn't wait was addressing the financial situation. I opened my laptop again and navigated to my bank's website. The mortgage payment had cleared, as had the automatic transfer for their property tax escrow account. The next payments were scheduled for January 15th, which gave me just over 3 weeks to decide whether to continue the arrangement in light of my newfound holiday exile. I opened a spreadsheet I'd created to track these secret payments. 15 months of financial support totaling just over $42,000. The numbers stared back at me, representing not just money, but a fundamental imbalance in a relationship that had always positioned my parents as the providers and authorities, and me as the recipient of their wisdom and support. The reality couldn't have been more different. While they maintained the appearance of comfortable retirement with country club memberships and seasonal vacations, I had been quietly deferring my own financial goals, including the down payment on a condo I'd been saving for, and the student loan refinancing that would have significantly reduced my monthly payments. I closed the spreadsheet without making any decisions. The familiar guilt that accompanied thoughts of stopping the payments washed over me. Whatever their failings as parents, I couldn't bear the thought of them losing their home, especially when I had the means, however strained, to prevent it. My phone chimed with an email notification. The airline confirming my canceled flight, home for Christmas. I had completely forgotten to address the travel arrangements in the shock of my father's text. At least I'd be able to get a partial credit for future travel. Future travel to where? The question lingered uncomfortably. If Christmas, the one holiday my family never missed, was now optional, what remained of our relationship? Birthday? Phone calls? Perfunctory Mother's and Father's Day cards? Would I become one of those people who saw their family only at weddings and funerals? The thought was both terrifying and oddly liberating. I'd structured so much of my adult life around maintaining family harmony, carefully editing my opinions, my relationships, even my career ambitions to minimize conflict. What might be possible if I redirected that energy toward my own priorities? I picked up the framed photograph on my side table. My parents, my brother, and me at my law school graduation 3 years earlier. We were all smiling. My mother's arm around my waist, my father's hand on my shoulder. It was the last time I remembered feeling like we were truly a family, united in celebrating a shared achievement. Since then, subtle distance had grown between us. My choice to pursue environmental law rather than corporate practice. My relationship with Daniel, a wildlife photographer whose irregular income and nomadic lifestyle my parents viewed with barely disguised disapproval. My increasing reluctance to silently endure my mother's critiques or my father's dismissive comments about impractical idealism. I returned the photograph to its place but turned it face down. A small act of rebellion, but it felt significant. The snow was falling more heavily now, blanketing the street in pristine white that muffled the city sounds. I made tea and curled, up on my window seat, watching the transformation outside while my thoughts circled around the transformation occurring within. By midnight, I had made 3 decisions. I would accept Zoe's invitation for Christmas. I would continue the mortgage payments for January but reevaluate after that. And I would stop expecting my parents to become people they had demonstrated they were not. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The last decision was the most painful, but also the most necessary. For years, I had interpreted their critical comments as misguided attempts to help me reach my potential. I had excused their dismissal of my choices as generational differences in perspective. I had attributed their emotional distance to stoicism rather than disinterest. But the text message had clarified something essential. In their hierarchy of values, my presence at a family holiday ranked below their comfort and convenience. Their desire for space outweighed any consideration of my feelings or plans. This wasn't a complex emotional dynamic requiring careful interpretation. It was simply a statement of priorities. I fell asleep on the window seat, waking at dawn, with a stiff neck and clearer perspective than I'd had in months. The next few days passed in a blur of work deadlines and preparations for a different kind of holiday than I'd anticipated. I shipped my brother's gift with a neutral note wishing him well. My parents' gifts remained unwrapped on my coffee table, a problem to address after the holidays. Zoe and Marcus welcomed me into their home on Christmas Eve with mulled wine and empathetic outrage on my behalf. Their apartment was crowded with friends, most of whom I knew from law school or through Zoe's extensive social network, all refugees from complicated family situations or simply too far from home to travel for the holiday. To chosen family, Marcus toasted, raising his glass as we gathered around their dining table. The people who love us by choice rather than obligation. The sentiment resonated through the room, glasses clinking and voices echoing the toast. I felt a knot in my chest loosen slightly. This wasn't the Christmas I had expected, but perhaps it was the one I needed. The evening unfolded in waves of conversation, laughter, and shared stories. No one monitored my wine consumption or questioned my career choices. No one commented on my appearance or interrogated me about my relationship status. When I mentioned an upcoming environmental case my firm was handling, I received interested questions rather than thinly veiled suggestions about more lucrative practice areas. By midnight, most guests had departed, leaving just Zoe, Marcus, and me sprawled across their living room furniture, contemplating whether another piece of Marcus's chocolate pecan pie would be excessive. "So," Zoe said, refilling our wine glasses, "are you going to tell your parents about the mortgage payments?" I had confided in her months ago about my financial arrangement, swearing her to secrecy. Her question now wasn't unexpected, but it still made me uncomfortable. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to throw it in their faces, show them I've been more responsible than they have. But that feels petty. It's not petty to want acknowledgement, Marcus observed. You've made a significant sacrifice for them. A sacrifice they never asked for, I pointed out. Would they have asked, even if they desperately needed help? Zoe challenged. The question hung in the air between us. We all knew the answer. My father would rather lose his home than admit financial vulnerability, particularly to his daughter. My mother would rather maintain appearances than confront reality. Their generation viewed asking for help as moral failure rather than human necessity. I think, I said slowly, I've been enabling a dynamic that isn't healthy for any of us. They get to maintain their self-image as the successful, self-sufficient parents. I get to feel secretly superior for helping them without their knowledge. None of us has to have an honest conversation about reality. That's surprisingly insightful for someone on her third glass of Cabernet, Zoe remarked. Fourth, I corrected, and apparently I get philosophical when rejected by my family of origin. We laughed, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. Later, lying on Zoe's comfortable guest bed, I scrolled through social media before sleep. My brother had posted pictures of Christmas Eve at my parents' home. The traditional dinner, the familiar decorations, his fiancée posed beside our mother with identical pearl earrings that were clearly a gift. The caption read, "Perfect family Christmas. Perfect, except for my absence," which went unmentioned in his post and presumably in their evening. I had been edited out of the family narrative as easily as deleting a photo. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt oddly detached, as though observing a play where I had once had a minor role that had been eliminated without affecting the overall production. I set my phone aside without commenting or liking the post. Some distances couldn't be crossed with social media interactions. Some wounds wouldn't heal with performative gestures. The honest conversation we needed couldn't happen until we all acknowledged the reality beneath our carefully maintained appearances. That conversation, I decided as I drifted toward sleep, would have to wait for another day. For tonight, I was warm, welcomed, and surrounded by people who valued my presence. That was more than enough. I couldn't have imagined then how soon the reckoning would come, or that it would begin with a panicked midnight phone call and the sound of my mother crying for the first time in my adult memory. 6 weeks after Christmas, I had settled back into my routine. The holiday rejection had lost its sharp sting, fading into a dull ache that surfaced only when I passed the still unwrapped gifts for my parents sitting on my bookshelf. I hadn't heard from them since the text message, not even an acknowledgement of the neutral Happy New Year message I'd sent on January 1st. My brother had called once, a brief conversation where neither of us mentioned my absence from the family Christmas. January had passed in a blur of work commitments and winter storms. My environmental law firm was representing several community groups opposing a development project that threatened a protected wetland area. The case consumed my days and many of my evenings, providing welcome distraction from personal disappointments. I'd even started viewing my unexpected holiday freedom as a blessing. Instead of recovering from family tension, I'd returned to work refreshed and focused. February arrived with plummeting temperatures and increased financial pressure. The annual performance reviews at my firm had concluded with disappointing news. The partnership track I'd been working toward had been extended by at least 2 years due to economic uncertainty. The salary increase I'd been counting on to ease. My budget constraints wouldn't materialize this year. That evening, I'd sat at my kitchen table with spreadsheets open on my laptop, calculating and recalculating my finances. The mortgage payment for my parents' home had processed 3 days earlier, reducing my checking account to an uncomfortably low balance. My own rent was due in a week, and the property tax installment for their home would process automatically on the 15th. Something had to give. After 2 hours of analysis, I had reached the inevitable conclusion. I could not continue making these payments without significant consequences to my own financial stability. I would need to either stop the payments entirely or have an honest conversation with my parents about contributing what I could, while they assumed responsibility for the balance. The decision weighed heavily as I prepared for bed that night. I set my alarm, turned off my bedside lamp, and was drifting toward sleep when my phone rang, its harsh electronic tone shattering the quiet darkness of my bedroom. The screen displayed my mother's name and a timestamp, 12:17 a.m. My heart raced as I answered, my mind immediately constructing worst-case scenarios. A health emergency, a house fire, my brother in an accident. Mom? What's wrong? Eleanor. Her voice was unsteady, edged with panic I'd never heard before. I need to talk to you. I know it's late, but I didn't know who else to call. Are you okay? Is Dad okay? I sat up, fully alert now. We're fine. Physically, we're fine. She drew a shaky breath. But there's been a mistake with the bank. Our mortgage payment bounced and now they're saying we're in default. They sent a certified letter. Your father doesn't want me calling you, but I didn't know what else to do. The statement hit me with sudden clarity. The January 30th payment, the one I had deliberately not scheduled after weeks of deliberation and financial analysis. The payment I had finally decided to discontinue without explanation, telling myself it was a necessary boundary rather than a petty retaliation for the Christmas rejection. When did you get the letter? I asked, playing for time as I processed the implications. Today, this afternoon. Another ragged breath. Eleanor, they're saying we've missed 2 payments, but that's impossible. The insurance settlement has been covering the mortgage automatically. Your father called the bank, but they said there's no record of any payment since December. December. The last month I had authorized the payment before making my decision. The timeline aligned perfectly with my actions, confirming what I already knew. There was no mistake, no bank error. There was just the reality I had hidden from them and the consequences now arriving at their doorstep. Mom, where's Dad now? Downstairs, looking through files for the insurance paperwork. He's convinced it's just an administrative error. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But Eleanor, I checked our bank statements. There's nothing. No deposits from the insurance company. No mortgage payments going out. I don't understand what's happening. The fear in her voice cut through my defensive rationalizations. Whatever their failings as parents, whatever hurt, they had caused me. This midnight panic was real. The possibility of losing their home was real, and my role in creating this situation was undeniable. Mom, I need you to listen to me carefully. I chose my words with deliberate precision. This isn't a bank error. There is no insurance settlement. There never was. Silence stretched across the line, broken only by her uneven breathing. What are you talking about? She finally asked. Dad made it up, I said, the partial truth easier than the complete one. There is no settlement covering your mortgage. I don't know what's been happening with your finances, but you need to have an honest conversation with Dad about your actual situation. Another long silence. How do you know this? I closed my eyes, momentarily weighing one more deception against the complicated truth. The truth won. Because I've been paying your mortgage since November of last year. You what? The disbelief in her voice was palpable. I found the past due notices when I was helping you organize your office. I set up automatic payments. From my account, the payments went through me, not any insurance settlement. But that's... She stopped abruptly. That's not possible. You couldn't afford that. I managed, I said simply. I took a second job teaching night classes at the community college. I rented out my spare room to a law school student. I made it work. Why would you do that without telling us? Her shock was edged with indignation now. "We're your parents, Eleanor. We don't need financial help from our daughter." The absurdity of her statement in the context of this midnight call was almost laughable. "Mom, you literally just called me panicking because your mortgage payment bounced. Clearly, you do need help." "That's different. This is a temporary situation, a mistake." "It's not a mistake. The mortgage payment bounced because I stopped making it." Her sharp intake of breath carried across the line. "You stopped? Why would you do that?" The question ignited something in me. Anger, frustration, hurt, all the emotions I'd been carefully managing since the Christmas rejection. Why would I stop financially supporting people who don't even want me at their holiday dinner? People who text me 3 days before Christmas to uninvite me. "Gee, Mom, I wonder." "That has nothing to do with this," she protested. "The holidays were complicated. Your father thought—" "I don't care what Dad thought," I interrupted. "What matters is what you both did. You excluded me from a family holiday without discussion or explanation, and now you're calling at midnight expecting me to solve financial problems you've been hiding. We weren't hiding anything. Your father had everything under control until he didn't," I finished. "Mom, I've seen the numbers. You haven't had things under control for at least 2 years. The second mortgage, the home equity line of credit, the credit card bills, it's all been building. I've been trying to give you breathing room to figure things out, but I can't carry this alone anymore." A new voice entered the conversation. My father, his tone sharp with the defensive anger I recognized from countless previous conflicts. "Is that Eleanor? Give me the phone, Catherine." I heard rustling as the phone changed hands, then my father's voice, strained but forcefully calm. "Eleanor, your mother shouldn't have called you this late. We're handling a minor banking issue, nothing for you to worry about." "She called me because your mortgage payment bounced and you received a default notice," I replied, matching his matter-of-fact tone. "And it's not a minor banking issue, Dad. It's a significant financial problem that you've been hiding from Mom and everyone else. I don't know what your mother told you, but the situation is under control. The insurance settlement—" "There is no insurance settlement," I cut in. "We both know that. It's a story you made up to avoid admitting the truth." "How dare you?" "I've been paying your mortgage for the past 15 months, I continued, speaking over his building outrage. "Every payment plus the property taxes, over $45,000 from my savings and second income. I stopped last month because I couldn't afford it anymore, and because I'd finally realized our relationship wasn't worth the sacrifice." Silence. Complete and heavy. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its defensive edge, replaced by something I'd rarely heard from him. Uncertainty. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're my parents, and I couldn't bear the thought of you losing your home. Because I hoped it would give you time to address the underlying problems. Because I believed that's what family does, support each other through difficult times." "We never asked for your money," he said, but the protestation sounded hollow even to him. "You never asked for anything," I agreed. "Not my help, not my input, not even my presence at Christmas. But need and acknowledgement are different things. Dad, you needed the help whether you were willing to admit it or not." I heard my mother's voice in the background, asking questions I couldn't quite make out. My father's muffled response, the static tension of a married couple realizing they've been operating with entirely different understandings of reality. "I'm putting you on speaker," my father finally said. "Your mother and I both need to understand exactly what's been happening." For the next 30 minutes, I explained everything. Finding the past due notices, setting up the automatic payments, managing my own finances to accommodate the additional expense. I detailed the sacrifices I'd made, postponing my student loan refinancing, taking on extra work, deferring my own savings goals. I showed them the spreadsheet I'd created to track the payments, emailing it to them while we spoke. Their reactions evolved as the conversation progressed. Initial denial gave way to reluctant acceptance, then uncomfortable gratitude, and finally something approaching genuine remorse. Not just for the financial burden I'd assumed, but for taking me for granted, in ways that extended far beyond money. "I don't understand why you wouldn't just tell us," my mother said. "Why carry this alone?" The question deserved an honest answer. "Because you wouldn't have accepted the help if I'd offered it directly. Because Dad would have seen it as failure, rather than as family support. Because both of you have spent years telling me my career choices were impractical while hiding your own financial problems." My bluntness created another stretch of silence. "You're right," my father finally said, the admission clearly costing him. "I wouldn't have accepted it. My generation, my pride." He stopped, then continued more firmly. "That's an explanation, not an excuse. You deserved better from us, Eleanor. As your parents and just as people." "The Christmas text," my mother added quietly. "That was wrong, inexcusably wrong. I told your father at the time, but I didn't insist. I should have." Their acknowledgments should have felt validating, but instead, I experienced a complex emotional collision, vindication tangled with lingering hurt, relief shadowed by the awareness that one conversation couldn't resolve years of dysfunctional patterns. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, the practical question easier than navigating the emotional terrain. "You have a mortgage payment in default and another one due in 2 weeks. What's your plan?" My father cleared his throat. "I can pull money from my IRA. There will be penalties, but it would cover the immediate shortfall." "That's a temporary solution to a structural problem," I pointed out. "What about next month and the month after?" "We've been considering downsizing," my mother volunteered. "The house is too big for just the two of us, and the maintenance costs are substantial. We've just been reluctant to make that decision." "Reluctant to admit we can't afford the lifestyle we've been pretending to maintain," my father corrected, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. "Your brother's engagement accelerated the timeline. We wanted one more family Christmas in the house before listing it." The statement landed like a revelation. "So that's why you uninvited me? Because you knew you'd be selling the house and didn't want to tell me?" "Not exactly," my mother hedged. "Your father thought, well, with your background in law and how perceptive you are, he was afraid you'd notice something was wrong and ask questions we weren't ready to answer. So you excluded me from our last family Christmas in my childhood. Home because you were afraid I'd figure out you had financial problems." The hurt resurfaced, sharper now with understanding. "Problems I already knew about and was actively helping to address?" "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible," my father admitted. "It was terrible," I agreed. "And unnecessary. I would have understood the financial situation." "I already did understand it. What I don't understand is why you thought excluding me was better than being honest." Another uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "We've made a lot of mistakes, Eleanor," my mother finally said, "with money, with communication, with how we've treated you. I don't know if an apology is enough, but it's where we need to start. We are truly, deeply sorry." "For everything," my father added, "not just the Christmas situation, but for taking your support for granted while criticizing your choices. For not seeing your success on its own terms rather than comparing it to our outdated expectations. For failing to give you the respect you've earned as a remarkable adult." Their words, particularly my father's, were unprecedented in my experience. The Parker family specialized in glossing over conflicts rather than acknowledging harm. Apologies, when they occurred at all, were oblique and conditional. This direct admission represented a seismic shift in our family dynamics. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." We talked for another hour, moving beyond apologies to practical solutions. My parents would meet with a financial advisor to develop a sustainable plan. They would list the house in the spring, transitioning to a smaller home they could comfortably afford. I would help with the immediate mortgage situation by making one final payment to bring the account current, but with clear boundaries and explicit acknowledgement. As the conversation wound down, my mother asked hesitantly, "Would you be willing to come for dinner this weekend? Not to discuss finances or the past, just to be together as a family." The invitation represented both opportunity and risk, the chance for a new beginning, but also the possibility of falling back into established patterns. After a moment's consideration, I accepted with a condition. "I'd like to bring Daniel," I said, mentioning my boyfriend who had never been welcomed into family gatherings. "If we're starting fresh, I want all parts of my life included, not just the ones that fit your expectations." To my surprise, they agreed without protest. As we prepared to end the call, my father said something that would have been unimaginable hours earlier. "I'm proud of you, Eleanor. Not just for helping us financially, but for being strong enough to set boundaries when we overstepped. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted. "But it was necessary. For all of us." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, processing the unexpected evolution of the evening. What had begun as a crisis call about a bounced mortgage payment had transformed into perhaps the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my parents. The financial reckoning had forced a relational reckoning long overdue. I had no illusions. That one midnight conversation would permanently transform my family dynamics. Years of established patterns wouldn't dissolve overnight. My parents would struggle with vulnerability, with accepting help, with adjusting their self-image. I would struggle with trusting their commitment to change, with maintaining healthy boundaries, with balancing support and self-protection. But something fundamental had shifted. The carefully maintained facades had cracked, allowing genuine connection to emerge through the fissures. The truth, uncomfortable but necessary, had finally been acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement lay the possibility of building something more authentic than what had come before. I reached for my phone and set a reminder to transfer funds for their mortgage payment in the morning. This time, the financial support would be offered openly, accepted gratefully, and understood as temporary assistance rather than indefinite obligation. The boundaries were clear, the expectations transparent. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was an honest one. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. The burden I'd carried wasn't just financial. It was the weight of unacknowledged truth, of one-sided sacrifice, of love without reciprocal respect. In forcing the conversation we'd all been avoiding, the bounced mortgage payment had created an opportunity for something I'd almost stopped believing was possible. A relationship with my parents based on who we actually were rather than who we pretended to be. The path forward would be challenging, but for the first time in years, it was a path we would walk together, eyes open to both the difficulties and the possibilities ahead. That awareness itself felt like victory, small but significant, fragile, but worth protecting. Like most meaningful transformations, it had begun not with grand declarations, but with simple truth-telling in a moment of unavoidable crisis. Tomorrow would bring practical tasks, financial transfers, appointment scheduling, planning for the weekend dinner. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I allowed myself to experience something that had been absent in my relationship with my parents for too long: hope. Not the wishful thinking of previous years, but clear-eyed hope grounded in honest communication and mutual recognition. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are enough. The days following the midnight phone call brought significant shifts in both practical arrangements and emotional landscapes. I transferred funds to cover my parents' mortgage default, this time with their full knowledge and explicit agreement about repayment terms. My father scheduled appointments with a financial advisor and a real estate agent, concrete steps toward addressing their underlying financial instability. My mother called daily with updates, our conversations tentative but increasingly honest. By Saturday evening, as I parked outside my childhood home with Daniel beside me, I felt an unsettling mixture of hope and apprehension. This dinner represented more than a simple family gathering. It was our first attempt at building a relationship based on truth rather than comfortable fictions. "You're sure about this?" Daniel asked, reaching across the console to take my hand. He understood the complexity of the situation, having listened to the full story the morning after my parents' midnight call. "Not remotely," I admitted, "but I'm sure about trying." Daniel squeezed my hand, his calm presence steadying me. As a wildlife photographer who had spent years documenting endangered species in challenging environments, he possessed a quiet patience I'd always admired. That patience had extended to my complicated family dynamics, though this would be his first actual meeting with my parents despite our 2 years together. "Remember," he said, "we can leave whenever you need to. One text to Zoe and she'll call with an emergency that requires our immediate attention." I smiled at our pre-arranged escape plan. Let's hope we don't need it. My parents' home looked exactly as it always had. The colonial-style facade with its symmetrical windows, the carefully maintained landscaping, the warm glow of lights, from within creating an image of domestic tranquility. The familiarity was both comforting and disconcerting. Everything appeared unchanged despite the seismic shifts in our understanding of one another. My mother opened the door before we reached, her smile genuine if nervous. She wore a simple dress I hadn't seen before, her usual statement jewelry absent. The subtle change in her presentation seemed symbolic of larger shifts, less concern with appearances, more authentic presence. "Eleanor." She embraced me with uncharacteristic emotion, then turned to Daniel with extended hand. "And you must be Daniel. We've heard so much about you." "All of it suspect, I'm sure," he replied with easy charm, accepting her handshake. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Parker. Catherine, please." She welcomed us inside with a gesture that seemed both familiar and newly awkward, as though she was suddenly conscious of playing the role of hostess in a home she might soon leave. "Robert is in the kitchen, actually cooking for once." He insisted on making the meal himself. This deviation from our usual family dinner script, my father cooking rather than supervising from the sidelines with critical commentary, was the first indication that tonight might genuinely be different. The second came as we entered the kitchen to find my father wearing an apron over his usual button-down shirt. His sleeves rolled up as he arranged something on serving plates. "Eleanor." He set down the utensils and approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. After a moment's pause, he embraced me briefly. "Thank you for coming." He extended his hand to Daniel. "Robert Parker. Good to meet you, young man." The formality was pure dad, but the absence of immediate interrogation about career prospects and financial stability represented remarkable restraint. "Dinner's almost ready," he continued. "I made that pasta dish you liked from our trip to Italy. I hope I remembered it correctly." The reference to a family vacation 10 years earlier caught me off guard. The pasta had indeed been my favorite, a fact I wouldn't have expected my father to recall given his general disinterest in culinary matters and selective memory regarding my preferences. "You remembered," I confirmed, the simple acknowledgement, carrying more emotional weight than the situation warranted. "Can I help with anything?" "Everything's under control for once," my mother interjected with a nervous laugh. "Why don't you show Daniel the house before we eat? He might enjoy seeing the garden from the sunroom, even in winter." The suggestion provided welcome space for adjustment, allowing Daniel and me to step away from the immediate intensity of family interaction. As I led him through the house, pointing out childhood photographs and architectural details, I found myself seeing the familiar space through new eyes, not just Daniel's perspective as a first-time visitor, but my own newly calibrated vision. This house had been both haven and battlefield, the setting for significant milestones and painful confrontations. Now it would soon belong to someone else. The physical repository of our family history transformed into another family's fresh start. The realization was melancholy, but not devastating. The true value lay not in the structure, but in the relationships it had contained, relationships we were now attempting to rebuild on more solid foundations. "It's a beautiful home," Daniel observed as we stood in the sunroom overlooking the Tach winter garden. "I can see why they've been reluctant to leave it." "It's not just the house," I explained, watching frost patterns on the glass catch the evening light. "It's what it represents. Success, stability, permanence. Selling it means acknowledging that the life they've presented to the world isn't sustainable. That's harder than losing the physical space." Daniel nodded, understanding as always the currents beneath the surface. Change is hardest when it challenges our identity. "Dinner's ready," my mother called from the dining room, interrupting further reflection. The dining room table had been set with the good china and silver, another departure from family tradition. These were typically reserved for holiday meals or celebrations with outside guests, never for a simple family dinner. The formality suggested both special effort and uncertainty about how to navigate our new relationship terrain. "I hope you like Italian food, Daniel," my father said as we took our seats. "Eleanor mentioned you've traveled extensively. I imagine you've had the authentic experience in many countries." The comment represented my father's version of an olive branch, acknowledgement of Daniel's profession without immediate judgment, recognition of experiences different from his own without dismissal. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. "I have been fortunate to visit many places," Daniel replied with diplomatic care, "but I find food always tastes better when shared with people who matter to someone I love." The simple statement clarified his priorities, not exotic experiences or professional achievements, but human connection. I watched my parents process this perspective, so different from their value system yet expressed with such natural conviction. "Well said," my father acknowledged after a moment. "Please, everyone, help yourselves." The initial conversation remained carefully neutral. Weather patterns, local news, innocuous topics that required no emotional vulnerability. Gradually, as the first course was consumed and wine glasses refilled, the artificial politeness gave way to more substantive exchange. "Eleanor mentioned you're documenting coastal wildlife for a conservation project," my mother said to Daniel. "That sounds fascinating, if challenging." "It is both," he agreed. "The ecosystem is changing rapidly due to human impact and climate shifts. I'm trying to create visual evidence compelling enough to influence policy decisions before more species are lost." "Sounds like you and Eleanor share similar goals then," my father observed, surprising me with this connection I hadn't expected him to make. "Her environmental law work and your conservation photography, complementary approaches to the same essential problem." "That's exactly right," Daniel said. "Different methods but aligned purpose. It's one of many things I admire about Eleanor, her commitment to creating meaningful change through her particular skills." The comment hung in the air for a moment, an implicit contrast to my parents' previous dismissal of my career choices as impractical idealism. My father sipped his wine, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "I owe you an apology about that, Eleanor," he said finally, setting down his glass with deliberate care. "I've been wrong about your professional choices. I measured success by financial metrics that made sense in my generation, but missed the point of what truly matters. The work you're doing has real value, more lasting value probably than what I spent my career pursuing." The admission was unprecedented in our family dynamic. My father had built his identity around being right, his authority unquestioned. This acknowledgement of error, delivered without qualification or deflection, represented a fundamental shift in how he positioned himself in relation to me. Thank you, I said simply, recognizing both the difficulty and significance of his statement. That means a lot to me. We've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation the other night, my mother added. About finances, yes, but more importantly about family, about what we've prioritized and what we've neglected. Like inviting your daughter for Christmas, my father interjected, his tone wry but sincerely remorseful. That decision, my decision really, reflected twisted priorities I'm not proud of. I was so focused on maintaining appearances that I hurt the person who had been quietly supporting us. The irony would be laughable if it weren't so shameful. The directness of his self-criticism created momentary discomfort around the table. We had no established script for this level of honesty in our family interactions. I can't change what happened, he continued into the silence. But I can acknowledge it was wrong, and I can commit to making different choices going forward, if you'll allow us the opportunity. The qualifier was significant, not assuming forgiveness or continued relationship, but requesting the chance to demonstrate change. It represented a shift from entitlement to humility, from parental authority to mutual respect. I'd like that, I said, but it needs to be a two-way relationship. I need to be heard, not just tolerated. I need my choices and my relationships respected, even when they don't match your expectations. I glanced at Daniel. All of my choices and relationships. We understand, my mother said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. And we want that too. We've missed so much by trying to fit you into our narrow vision of success instead of appreciating who you actually are. Daniel, who had been quietly supportive throughout this exchange, spoke up. If I may say something? My parents turned toward him with startled interest, unaccustomed to outside perspective on our family dynamics. In my work, he said, I often photograph endangered species fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. What determines their success isn't strength or intelligence alone, but adaptability, the willingness to change in response to new conditions. The most resilient creatures are those that can adjust their behaviors while maintaining their essential nature. He looked at each of us in turn. What I'm witnessing tonight suggests your family has that capacity for resilient adaptation. That's rare and valuable. The observation created space for reflection, offering a framework for understanding our current transition that honored both the difficulty and the possibility within it. I hope you're right, my father said after a moment. Though I suspect, my wife and daughter have always had more adaptive capacity than I have demonstrated. It's never too late to develop new capacities, Daniel replied. The wildlife I document has evolved over thousands of generations. Human consciousness allows us to evolve our behaviors within a single lifetime, even a single moment, through awareness and choice. My father nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. You're a thoughtful man, Daniel. I can see why Eleanor values your partnership. The acknowledgement, the first positive assessment of any relationship I'd pursued, marked another small but significant shift. My mother smiled, her expression reflecting both happiness at the pleasant exchange and lingering sadness for opportunities lost to previous rigidity. As the meal progressed to dessert, a tiramisu my father had apparently created from scratch, with mixed but enthusiastic results, the conversation continued its gradual transformation from polite distance to genuine exchange. We discussed the practical aspects of their planned downsizing, with Daniel offering suggestions about photographically documenting meaningful aspects of the house before departure. We talked about my current environmental case, my parents asking questions that reflected actual interest rather than thinly veiled criticism. When my father mentioned an upcoming gallery exhibition featuring local artists, Daniel shared information about his conservation photography project without prompting or apology. The interaction flowed with increasing naturalness, occasional awkward moments balanced by instances of surprising connection. After dinner, As we moved to the living room with coffee, my mother disappeared briefly, returning with a large envelope. "I found these while organizing for the move," she explained, handing it to me. "I thought you might want them." Inside were newspaper clippings and certificates documenting achievements throughout my educational and early professional career. Debate team victories, academic honors, community service recognition, even the announcement of my first environmental law case. The collection represented years of accomplishments my parents had seemingly dismissed or minimized at the time. "You kept all these?" I asked, surprised by both the preservation and the previous concealment of this evidence of parental pride. "Of course we did," my mother said. "We may not have shown it appropriately, but we've always been proud of you, Eleanor. Even when we didn't understand or agree with your choices." "We just had fixed ideas about what success should look like," my father added. "Ideas that said more about our limitations than yours." I examined a photograph of myself at law school graduation, my parents flanking me with formal smiles that revealed little of their actual feelings. "I think we've all been operating with incomplete information about each other." "Not anymore," my father said. "At least, not if we continue with this new approach. Complete transparency may be uncomfortable, but it's proving far better than comfortable fictions." As the evening drew to a close, the conversation shifted to future plans. My mother suggested a family dinner the following month at my apartment, with my brother and his fiancée included. My father mentioned a community lecture on wetland conservation he thought might interest Daniel and me. Small gestures toward continuing relationship, tentative but sincere. Standing at the door as we prepared to leave, my father hesitated, then reached for a small package on the entry table. "This was supposed to be your Christmas gift," he said, extending it toward me. "Better late than never, I hope." The carefully wrapped box contained a fountain pen with my initials engraved on the barrel. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely appreciative of both the gift and the gesture it represented. "Your grandfather gave me my first good pen when I passed the bar exam," he explained. "I should have given this to you when you did the same. Another delayed recognition I regret." "Thank you," I said simply, understanding that the gift acknowledged not just my professional achievement, but my place in a family lineage of accomplishment. Inclusion rather than exclusion. As Daniel and I drove away from my childhood home, neither of us spoke immediately, processing the evening's unexpectedly positive evolution. "That went better than you anticipated," he finally observed. "Infinitely better," I agreed, "though one dinner doesn't transform decades of patterns." "No, but it creates possibility for what comes next. They're trying, Eleanor. Genuinely trying." "They are," I acknowledged, "and so am I." Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from my father, another unprecedented occurrence in our typically formal communication patterns. "Thank you for giving us a second chance tonight. We don't deserve it, but we're grateful. Your mother and I were thinking we might need legal advice about the house sale. If you know anyone who specializes in real estate law, we'd appreciate a recommendation. Only if it's not an imposition." The message represented multiple shifts: acknowledgement of wrongdoing, expression of gratitude, and most significantly, willingness to seek my professional input rather than assuming superior knowledge. The qualifier about imposition demonstrated new awareness of boundaries and reciprocity in our relationship. I texted back, "Happy to recommend someone. I'll send contact information tomorrow, and thank you for dinner." It meant a lot to finally have Daniel included. His response came quickly. "He's a good man. We should have met him sooner. Our loss, and another mistake to rectify going forward. Good night, Eleanor." As I set my phone aside, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From Christmas rejection to financial crisis to tentative reconciliation. The path had been neither straight nor easy, involving painful confrontations and uncomfortable truths. Yet the outcome, however preliminary, suggested that sometimes crisis provided necessary catalyst for change that comfort would never have inspired. My parents were not transformed, nor was I. We remained fundamentally who we had always been, with established patterns and ingrained responses that would resurface in future interactions. The difference lay not in complete personality renovation, but in willingness to see one another more completely, to acknowledge both limitations and possibilities, to prioritize relationship over appearance. The financial situation that had precipitated our midnight conversation remained challenging. My parents still faced difficult decisions about downsizing and lifestyle adjustment. I still needed to establish sustainable boundaries around financial support and emotional investment. These practical considerations would require ongoing attention and negotiation. Yet, something essential had shifted in our family system. The careful facades had cracked, allowing genuine connection to emerge through the fissures. The unspoken rules governing our interactions had been acknowledged and reconsidered. The possibility of building relationship based on truth, rather than comfortable fiction, had been established, however tentatively. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that the evening had offered something I'd almost stopped believing was possible. Not perfect resolution or complete transformation, but authentic beginning. My parents remained flawed individuals with their own struggles and limitations. I remained their imperfect daughter with my own sensitivities and boundaries. Our relationship remained complex and sometimes challenging. But now, perhaps for the first time, we were engaging with one another as actual people rather than projected ideals or disappointing deviations from expectation. The honesty that crisis had forced upon us offered opportunity for connection that comfort would never have permitted. That possibility itself, fragile but real, represented hope worth nurturing. The bounced mortgage payment that had prompted their midnight call had revealed financial instability they could no longer deny. But more importantly, it had exposed relational patterns equally unsustainable, equally in need of honest assessment and deliberate reconstruction. In that revelation lay opportunity for building something more authentic than what had come before. Not perfect, not immediate, but possible in ways that previous pretense had prevented. Tomorrow would bring practical tasks, sending real estate, attorney recommendations, continuing my own financial planning, preparing for an upcoming court date in my environmental case. But these practical considerations now existed within a context of expanded possibility for family relationship, based on mutual respect, rather than hierarchical expectation. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings contain all the possibility we need to move forward with renewed hope and clearer vision. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was a path we might walk together. Eyes open to both difficulties and possibilities, committed to truth over comfortable fiction, engaged in the complex, imperfect, worthwhile work of genuine relationship. Spring arrived in gradual increments, longer daylight hours, tentative green shoots pushing through thawing soil, migrating birds returning to familiar territories. These natural transitions mirrored the careful evolution in my family relationships. Over the 8 weeks following our reunion dinner, weekly phone calls had replaced sporadic text messages. 2 additional family dinners had occurred without significant tension. My brother and his fiancée had joined us for the most recent gathering, their initial skepticism about our parents' changed approach gradually yielding to cautious participation in more honest exchanges. Progress wasn't linear. My father occasionally reverted to judgmental commentary when discussing my environmental case, though he now caught himself mid-sentence with visible effort. My mother still reflexively defended outdated family patterns before acknowledging the need for new approaches. My brother alternated between embracing the increased authenticity and retreating to familiar denial when conversations became uncomfortable. These recursive patterns were frustrating, but also reassuringly human. Evidence that our changes were genuine rather than performative, complicated rather than superficial. The most significant development occurred in mid-March when my parents listed their house for sale. The concrete action represented both financial necessity and symbolic commitment to their stated intentions. They had selected a real estate attorney from my recommended list and consulted me throughout the preparation process, demonstrating new willingness to acknowledge my professional expertise. On a bright Saturday morning, I arrived at their home to help prepare for the first open house scheduled for the following day. The property looked particularly beautiful in early spring light, the landscaping my father had meticulously maintained for decades showing the first evidence of seasonal renewal. Mature trees were budding, perennial gardens awakening, the entire setting a testament to years of careful cultivation. "Perfect timing," my mother called from the front porch as I parked in the driveway. "Your father's in the backyard having an existential crisis over leaving his cherry trees. Perhaps you can talk him through it while I finish staging the living room." Her tone was light, but underscored by genuine concern. My father's attachment to the property went beyond financial investment or status symbol. This land had been his creative canvas, the space where his otherwise tightly controlled personality found expression through cultivation and care. I found him standing beneath the largest cherry tree, now covered with delicate pink blossoms that drifted down in the gentle breeze like organic confetti. He didn't turn as I approached, his attention fixed on the branches above. "I planted this the year you were born," he said without preamble. "It was barely taller than I was then. The nursery owner told me it might not survive our soil conditions, but I amended the entire area, installed proper drainage, protected it through 3 harsh winters before it established properly." He reached up to touch a low-hanging branch. 34 years of growth. The new owners will probably cut it down to install a pool or expanded patio. The vulnerability in his voice was still unfamiliar enough to be startling. My father had always presented strength without sentimentality, practicality without emotional attachment. This open acknowledgement of loss represented significant evolution in both his self-awareness and his willingness to share interior experience. "Not necessarily," I offered, standing beside him to consider the tree from his perspective. "The right buyers might appreciate what you've created here, and even if they don't, you've had 34 years of watching it grow." I paused, searching for words that would honor his attachment without reinforcing resistance to necessary change. The value isn't just in its continued existence, but in what cultivating it has meant to you all these years. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "That's a surprisingly wise perspective. When did you become the one offering life philosophy to me rather than the reverse?" "Probably around the time we both started acknowledging reality instead of maintaining comfortable fictions," I suggested. He laughed softly, the sound still rare enough to be noteworthy. "Fair assessment. Speaking of reality, your mother and I met with the financial advisor again yesterday. I've been meaning to update you." We moved to the garden bench positioned to maximize cherry blossom viewing, a deliberate shift from dwelling on impending loss to addressing practical matters. My father detailed the comprehensive financial plan they had developed, downsizing to a smaller home in a nearby community, restructuring retirement accounts, eliminating unnecessary expenses, creating sustainable budget parameters. The plan was solid if belated, reflecting both professional guidance and personal commitment to facing financial reality without further denial. The advisor suggested bankruptcy as an option, he admitted, the word clearly difficult for him to voice. "Given the second mortgage and credit card debt, but that's not the path we're choosing. We created these obligations. We'll address them responsibly, even if it means significant lifestyle adjustments." "That seems appropriate," I agreed, recognizing both the practical wisdom and the values underlying his decision. "The house should sell quickly in this market. That will provide substantial relief." "About that," he said, his tone shifting toward familiar discomfort with requesting assistance. The real estate agent suggested professional photographs for the listing. Your mother mentioned that Daniel might be willing to take them, given his expertise. Obviously, we would compensate him properly for his time. The request represented multiple layers of progress, acknowledging Daniel's professional capabilities, respecting appropriate compensation rather than expecting family favors, directly asking for what they needed rather than creating complicated scenarios to avoid vulnerability. Small indicators of real change in approach. I'll ask him, I promised. He's on assignment for the conservation project this weekend, but he'd probably be available early next week before the listing goes live. My father nodded, seemingly relieved by both my willingness to facilitate the connection and the buffer of a few days before needing to follow through. Despite genuine efforts toward change, direct interaction with Daniel still created visible discomfort. Not from disapproval, but from awareness of previous dismissive treatment and uncertainty about appropriate correction. "How is the environmental case progressing?" he asked, deliberately shifting focus from his discomfort to my professional concerns. This expressed interest in my work without critique or comparison represented another small but significant adjustment in our relationship. Pattern. I updated him on recent developments, the preliminary injunction we'd secured to halt development in the most sensitive wetland areas, the community coalition we'd built to support conservation efforts, the technical experts who had agreed to testify about ecosystem impacts. My father listened with genuine attention, asking relevant questions that demonstrated actual engagement rather than perfunctory interest. "You're making a real difference," he said when I finished, his tone reflecting sincere acknowledgement rather than obligatory approval, creating tangible protection for resources that matter. I didn't appreciate the significance of environmental law until recently, but it's clearly essential work. "Thank you," I replied, the simple validation more meaningful than elaborate. Praise would have been. "It matters to me." "I know that now," he acknowledged. "I should have recognized it sooner." We sat in relatively comfortable silence for several minutes, watching cherry blossoms drift downward in the spring breeze. The quiet between us felt different than previous silences, contemplative rather than strained, connective rather than divisive. My mother eventually joined us, carrying a tray with coffee and muffins. "A necessary break before we tackle the garage," she announced. "That space contains archaeological evidence of decades of poor organizational choices." The remainder of the day passed in practical activity, sorting, discarding, organizing, preparing. My parents approached the process with surprising openness to releasing possessions that no longer served practical purpose or carried genuine sentimental value. Their willingness to distinguish between meaningful mementos and accumulated objects suggested healthier relationship with both material possessions and the past they represented. By late afternoon, the garage had been transformed from chaotic storage to organized space. We had filled my car with donations for local charities and identified key items to retain for their downsized future home. The physical clearing seemed to parallel an emotional clearing, creating space for new possibilities by releasing what no longer served. As we finished, my father disappeared briefly into the house, returning with 3 glasses and a bottle of scotch I recognized as one he reserved for significant occasions. "This feels like a moment worth acknowledging," he explained, pouring modest servings. "Not just preparing the house for sale, but this new way of being in relationship, of finally seeing one another clearly." We raised our glasses in silent agreement, the simple ritual marking transition more effectively than elaborate declarations could have accomplished. The scotch was excellent, warming, complex, worth savoring rather than rushing. Like the relationship we were carefully rebuilding, it required attention to appreciate properly. My mother broke the contemplative silence. "While we're acknowledging new beginnings, there's something else your father and I wanted to discuss with you." Something in her tone triggered reflexive apprehension. a conditioned response to previous conversations that had begun with similar framing before delivering criticism or unwelcome expectations. I consciously released the tension, reminding myself that our relationship dynamics were evolving, even if established patterns occasionally resurfaced. "We've been thinking about your brother's wedding," she continued. "As you know, they've settled on September at the Lakeside Country Club. Your father and I had originally planned to cover all expenses as our gift to them." I nodded, familiar with this traditional expectation, though uncertain where the conversation was heading. My brother's wedding plans had proceeded with minimal consultation and maximum assumption about parental financial support, despite my parents' increasingly transparent communications about their changed circumstances. "Given our current situation, that's simply not possible," my father interjected. "We can contribute something meaningful, but nowhere near the full amount they're expecting. We need to have that conversation with them, and we'd like your support when we do." The request surprised me. Previous family patterns would have involved my parents overextending themselves financially while maintaining appearances, then dealing privately with resulting strain. Seeking my participation in a difficult family conversation represented significant departure from established approach. "Of course," I agreed. "Though I'm not sure how much influence I'll have. James and Victoria have very specific visions for their wedding." "We know," my mother acknowledged, "and we don't expect you to convince them of anything. We just think having you present will help maintain focus on honest communication, rather than defaulting to old patterns where your father would simply write checks to avoid uncomfortable conversations. We've also realized," my father added, "that we've treated you and your brother very differently in terms of financial support. His graduate school, his down payment on the condo, and now wedding expectations, all provided without question. Meanwhile, you've been supporting us without acknowledgement while managing your own financial responsibilities independently." The acknowledgement of this long-standing inequality in family dynamics momentarily rendered me speechless. The disparity had been evident throughout our adult lives but never previously addressed, my parents justifying preferential treatment of my brother through various rationalizations about differing needs, career paths, or personality traits. "We can't change the past," my mother said, correctly interpreting my silence. "But we can be more conscious about equity going forward. This wedding conversation is part of that intention. And we'll need to manage our own discomfort with disappointing expectations," my father continued. "Previously, I would have liquidated investments at significant penalty or taken additional credit card debt rather than saying no to your brother's requests. That approach is neither financially sustainable nor relationally healthy." Their self-awareness impressed me. Not just recognition of practical financial limitations, but insight into underlying emotional patterns that had perpetuated harmful dynamics. The willingness to face uncomfortable conversations rather than avoid them through financially damaging decisions represented genuine maturation in approach. "When were you thinking of having this conversation?" I asked, mentally reviewing my calendar for the coming weeks. "Next weekend," my mother replied. "They're coming for dinner Sunday evening. We thought having you there might help create context for the broader changes we're making, not just regarding the wedding, but in our overall approach to family relationships and financial reality." The timeline made sense given the house listing and impending changes. Including me in this significant conversation indicated trust in my perspective and commitment to new family patterns based on honesty rather than appearance management. "I'll be there," I promised. "Though I think you're underestimating your own capacity to communicate effectively. You've both demonstrated remarkable growth in that area over recent months." My father's expression reflected surprise at this assessment. "That's generous of you to say, considering our historical track record." "I'm not being generous, I'm being accurate," I clarified. "The ability to acknowledge mistakes, adjust course, and commit to different approaches is far more valuable than never making errors in the first place." You've both shown considerable courage in facing difficult truths and making necessary changes. My mother's eyes dampened at this acknowledgement. That means more than you know, Eleanor, especially coming from you. We finished our scotch. In companionable silence, watching late afternoon sunlight illuminate cherry blossoms in golden hues. The moment felt significant, not as dramatic conclusion to our family journey, but as meaningful milestone in ongoing evolution. Later, driving home with my car filled with donation items, I reflected on the day's unexpected emotional resonance. What had begun as practical preparation for a house sale had evolved into deeper acknowledgement of changing family dynamics. My parents' willingness to address financial reality with my brother, their recognition of previous inequitable treatment, their request for my support in difficult conversations, all represented significant departure from established patterns. I had no illusions about the conversation with my brother. James had benefited from our parents' previous approach and would likely resist changes that affected his expectations. His fiancée Victoria, accustomed to certain social standards and unfamiliar with our family's evolving dynamics, would find scaled-back wedding support particularly challenging. The discussion would inevitably create tension and potential conflict. Yet the willingness to face this discomfort rather than avoid it through financially damaging decisions represented important progress. My parents were choosing sustainable truth over comfortable fiction, even knowing that choice would create immediate relationship challenges. Their request for my presence indicated both trust in my perspective and commitment to new family patterns based on transparency rather than appearance management. As I parked outside my apartment building, my phone chimed with a text message from Daniel. How was Operation House preparation? Need rescue or celebration? I smiled at his characteristically balanced inquiry, offering support without assumption about what form that support might need to take. Both, I texted back. Surprisingly meaningful day. Also unexpectedly exhausting. Dinner? I'll share details. His immediate response, already ordered from that Thai place you like. ETA 20 minutes. I've got interesting wildlife shots from today's shoot to share too. The simple exchange exemplified what I valued most in our relationship, mutual support. Without excessive demands, shared experiences without expectation of perfect alignment, practical care without dramatic demonstration. After a day of navigating evolving family dynamics, the straightforward connection felt particularly valuable. Over dinner, I shared the day's experiences with Daniel, both practical preparations and emotional revelations. His questions demonstrated characteristic attentiveness to underlying patterns rather than surface details. Your father asking me to photograph the house, that's significant progress, he observed. Especially acknowledging professional value through proper compensation. Significant but still uncomfortable for him, I noted. He's genuinely trying, but established patterns don't dissolve overnight. True transformation takes time, Daniel agreed. What matters is direction and commitment, not perfection. His perspective echoed what I had recognized throughout the day. The value lay not in flawless implementation of changed approaches, but in genuine intention to evolve, even when that evolution included occasional regression and consistent imperfection. They asked me to be present when they tell my brother about reduced wedding funding, I added, reaching for another spring roll. That's unprecedented involvement in a difficult family conversation. How do you think your brother will respond? Not well initially, I admitted. James has always assumed parental financial support would be unlimited. Victoria has been planning their wedding since our first introduction, with expectations that align with my parents' previous lifestyle rather than current reality. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Another opportunity for establishing what your mother called new patterns in family communication, though not without challenges. Definitely not without challenges, I agreed. But necessary ones if we're going to build relationships based on reality rather than comfortable fictions. We spent the remainder of the evening reviewing Daniel's wildlife photographs, Remarkable images capturing the vulnerability and resilience of species adapting to changing conditions. The parallel to my family's current evolution wasn't lost on either of us, though we left it unspoken, allowing the visual narrative to communicate what words would have oversimplified. Before sleep that night, I found myself reflecting on the cherry trees my father had planted and tended with such care. Trees that would soon provide shade and beauty for strangers, rather than the family for whom they had been originally cultivated. The initial sadness of this reality remained, but alongside it grew understanding that value existed beyond possession or permanence. What mattered was not controlling outcomes, but investing attention in what we believed worthy of care, whether relationships, creative endeavors, professional commitments, or flowering trees. The results of that attention might unfold in unexpected ways, benefiting people we would never meet, creating beauty we might not personally witness. The significance lay in the cultivation itself, the choice to nurture potential despite uncertain outcomes. My father's cherry trees would continue their seasonal cycles under new ownership. My parents would establish new patterns in different physical space. My brother would adapt to changed expectations or create unnecessary suffering through resistance. All these developments remained outside my control, as they properly should. What remained within my influence was my own approach to these evolving relationships, choosing honesty over comfortable fiction, appropriate boundaries over unlimited accommodation, authentic connection over superficial harmony. These choices didn't guarantee specific outcomes but created conditions where genuine relationship became possible. As spring deepened outside my window, I recognized that the season's metaphors applied perfectly to our family situation. New growth emerged from what appeared dormant. Established structures transformed through natural processes of release and renewal. What had seemed barren revealed unexpected vitality when conditions supported authentic expression. The path forward wasn't clearly marked with guaranteed outcomes. Family dynamics established over decades wouldn't transform completely through a few months of changed approach. My parents would struggle with ingrained patterns despite genuine intention to evolve. My brother would resist adjustments that challenged his expectations. I would navigate my own responses to these complex interactions, sometimes gracefully and sometimes with understandable imperfection. Yet possibility existed that hadn't before. Opportunity for authenticity, previously sacrificed to appearance. Management. Potential for connection previously limited by rigid expectations. The financial crisis that had initiated these changes had created painful but necessary disruption to unsustainable patterns, forcing acknowledgement of reality that comfort would never have permitted. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt genuine gratitude for this disruption and its catalyzing effects. The midnight call about a bounced mortgage payment had initiated more than financial reorganization. It had created opening for relationship transformation previously unimaginable within our family system. That opportunity itself, however imperfectly realized, represented hope worth nurturing through the inevitable challenges ahead. Tomorrow would bring practical tasks, coordinating Daniel's photography of my parents' home, preparing for upcoming meetings in my environmental case, addressing my own financial planning needs, but these activities now existed within expanded context of family relationships evolving toward greater authenticity, even as they retained distinctive characteristics and established tendencies. It wasn't perfection, but it was genuine progress. It wasn't dramatic transformation, but it was meaningful evolution. It wasn't everything, but it was far more than I had believed possible months earlier when a text message had excluded me from family Christmas. That evolution itself, from rejection to inclusion, from pretense to authenticity, from hierarchy to mutuality, represented possibility worth continuing to cultivate, with all the patience, attention, and care my father had devoted to his beloved cherry trees. The Sunday evening designated for our family discussion arrived with perfect early spring weather, clear skies, gentle breezes, and lengthening daylight that seemed to reflect possibility rather than constraint. I arrived at my parents' home 30 minutes before my brother and his fiancée were expected, allowing time to align our approach to the conversation ahead. The house looked transformed. Daniel had photographed it the previous Tuesday. His professional, eye-capturing architectural details, natural lighting, and thoughtful design elements that casual observation might miss. The resulting images, now featured in the online listing, presented the property with understated elegance rather than ostentatious display. 3 separate showing appointments had already been scheduled for the coming week. My father greeted me at the door, his expression reflecting both resolve and apprehension. "Thank Daniel again for the photographs," he said as I entered. The real estate agent was impressed with their quality. Apparently, professional images significantly impact selling price and time on market. "I'll pass along your appreciation," I promised. Though he already received your thank you note and check, the personal acknowledgement meant more to him than the payment. My father nodded, clearly pleased by this information. "Your mother's in the kitchen finishing dinner preparations. I've opened a bottle of that Cabernet your brother prefers. Thought it might help create receptive atmosphere for difficult conversation." The consideration reflected both traditional hosting generosity and strategic preparation for challenging interaction. My father had always approached family gatherings with careful attention to environmental details, believing proper setting could influence conversational outcomes. This evening was no exception, though the purpose differed from previous entertaining objectives. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Eleanor, perfect timing. Everything's ready except the final salad assembly. James just texted they're running about 10 minutes late." "Victoria had a final fitting for her wedding dress this afternoon," my father added, his tone carefully neutral. "Apparently, it required unexpected adjustments." The innocuous update carried subtle weight given our evening's agenda. Victoria's wedding planning proceeded with unwavering momentum, despite my parents' changing financial circumstances that remained unacknowledged in direct conversation with my brother and his fiancée, despite increasingly transparent family communication in other contexts. "How are you both feeling about this conversation?" I asked, moving toward the living room where we could speak privately before their arrival. My parents exchanged glances, their nonverbal communication reflecting decades of partnership despite recent revelations and adjustments. "Nervous," my mother admitted. "James has never responded well to disappointment, and Victoria has specific expectations about parental contributions to wedding expenses, which we encouraged through our previous patterns," my father acknowledged, accepting responsibility rather than deflecting it. "We've never set appropriate financial boundaries with your brother. Tonight represents necessary correction to established dynamics, but that doesn't make it easy." Their self-awareness impressed me, recognition of both the importance of changed approach and the legitimate challenge of implementing that change with family members accustomed to different patterns. This balanced perspective represented significant growth from previous tendencies toward either conflict avoidance or rigid confrontation. "What's your ideal outcome for this evening?" I asked, helping focus their intentions beyond anxiety about the conversation itself. My mother considered the question thoughtfully. Honest communication without relationship rupture. Clear understanding of what we can contribute without creating resentment about what we cannot. Respectful disagreement if necessary, but fundamental connection maintained. "Exactly," my father agreed. "We want to support their celebration appropriately without compromising our financial stability or perpetuating unhealthy family dynamics. And we want to demonstrate that changed financial circumstances don't diminish emotional investment in their happiness." Their aligned purpose impressed me, nuanced, realistic, focused on relationship health rather than mere conflict avoidance. Previous family patterns would have defaulted to either capitulation, my father silently liquidating investments to meet expectations, or authoritarian pronouncement, presenting financial limitations as non-negotiable decree without explanation. Their current approach reflected more mature integration of both boundary setting and emotional connectivity. That seems both reasonable and compassionate, I affirmed. And my role this evening? Witness and perspective provider, my mother suggested. Not mediator or defender, just additional family voice in an important conversation. Though your legal background might help articulate financial concepts clearly if necessary, my father added pragmatically. The doorbell interrupted further planning. My brother and Victoria had arrived earlier than expected, their voices carrying through the entryway as my mother went to welcome them. I remained in the living room with my father noting his deep breath and straightened posture, physical preparation for challenging interaction. James entered first, his confident stride and designer casual attire projecting the successful young financial analyst image he had carefully cultivated since college. Victoria followed, elegant in understated luxury brands that complemented her polished appearance. They represented contemporary professional success, attractive, ambitious, perfectly coordinated in both personal presentation and career trajectories. Eleanor! James's surprise seemed genuine. Didn't expect to see you tonight. Thought this was just a regular family dinner. Last-minute addition, I explained easily. Had some legal documents for Mom and Dad related to the house sale. Seemed efficient to combine visits. The minor deception created space for natural conversation before addressing the evening's primary purpose. Victoria moved to embrace me with practiced warmth, her perfume expensive but subtle, her engagement. Ring catching light with deliberate prominence. Perfect timing, she said. I've been meaning to ask about your availability for bridesmaid dress fittings. We need to schedule those within the next 3 weeks to ensure proper alterations before September. The comment momentarily disoriented me. Despite regular family interactions since the Christmas reconciliation, neither James nor Victoria had actually invited me to participate in their wedding, much less as a bridesmaid. The assumption of my involvement without explicit invitation exemplified their general approach. Expectations presented as established facts rather than requests requiring acceptance. We should discuss wedding details over dinner, my mother interjected smoothly, recognizing my surprise. Everything's ready if you'd like to move to the dining room. The meal began with general conversation, updates on James's recent work project, Victoria's promotion at her marketing firm, discussions of early spring weather and local news. My parents maintained their roles as attentive hosts, serving food and facilitating discussion with practiced ease. An outside observer would have noticed nothing unusual about the family gathering. As dinner progressed to the main course, my father subtly shifted conversation toward more consequential topics. The house listing has generated significant interest. Already, he noted, refilling wine glasses. 3 showing appointments scheduled this week, with the open house tomorrow. The real estate agent expects it will move quickly in this market. Still think you're making a mistake selling this place, James commented, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. Property values in this neighborhood continue to appreciate. You should consider renting it instead, creating passive income stream while retaining the asset. The suggestion reflected both his financial analyst perspective and his continued detachment from our parents' actual circumstances, despite months of increasingly transparent communication about their situation. We've considered all options carefully, my father replied evenly. For our current needs and long-term planning, downsizing makes most sense. The maintenance costs alone are substantial, not to mention property taxes and utilities for space we no longer need. I still don't understand the sudden urgency, Victoria interjected, her tone reflecting genuine confusion rather than intentional dismissal. You've always talked about this as your forever home. The comment illuminated the communication gap that remained despite my parents' efforts toward transparency. Clearly, James had shared minimal information about our family's financial reality with his fiancée, maintaining appearances rather than acknowledging changed circumstances. My mother glanced at my father, a silent exchange confirming their readiness to address the evening's central purpose. She set down her utensils deliberately, creating momentary pause in the conversation's rhythm. James, Victoria, we wanted to have dinner together tonight specifically to discuss some important matters related to both our housing situation and your upcoming wedding, she began, her voice calm but direct. The changes we're making aren't casual preferences, but necessary adjustments to financial reality we've been avoiding for too long. James's expression shifted from casual attention to focused wariness. What kind of adjustments? My father continued the explanation they had clearly prepared together. The truth is, we've experienced significant financial setbacks over the past several years that we've been reluctant to acknowledge publicly. My investment portfolio suffered substantial losses during the market downturn. Your mother's interior design business never fully recovered after the pandemic. We've been maintaining appearances while steadily depleting resources in unsustainable ways. Victoria looked genuinely surprised, turning toward James with questioning expression that suggested this information contradicted previous understandings. My brother's posture had tensed noticeably, his jaw setting in familiar pattern that indicated defensive response forming. The house sale isn't just about downsizing, my mother added quietly. It's about eliminating the second mortgage we've been carrying, reducing overall debt, and creating sustainable retirement plan based on actual resources rather than wishful thinking. Why is this the first we're hearing about serious financial problems? James demanded, directing his question primarily toward our father. You've never indicated anything beyond temporary cash flow issues. Because we weren't being honest, with you or ourselves, my father acknowledged. Pride prevented proper transparency. We maintained lifestyle appearances we could no longer afford while making increasingly problematic financial decisions to avoid addressing reality. Eleanor knew, James said flatly, glancing in my direction with implied accusation. She's been involved in this decision-making while we've been kept in the dark. Eleanor discovered our financial situation accidentally while helping organize your mother's home office, my father clarified. She actually covered our mortgage payments for 15 months without our knowledge, trying to give us time to address underlying issues without crisis. This revelation created visible surprise in both James and Victoria. My brother's expression cycled through multiple emotions: disbelief, confusion, recalibration of understood family dynamics. Victoria's perfectly maintained composure momentarily faltered, her gaze shifting between family members as though reassessing relationships in light of new information. You paid their mortgage? James finally asked me directly. Without telling. Anyone? Why would you do that? Because they needed help they couldn't ask for, I replied simply. And because family supports each other through difficult transitions, even when that support isn't comfortable to acknowledge. The implicit contrast to his own approach hung in the air unspoken. His continued expectations of parental financial support despite professional success, his maintenance of appearances rather than engagement with emerging family realities. My mother redirected conversation toward the evening's central purpose. We're sharing this context because it directly impacts what we can contribute to your wedding expenses. We want to support your celebration in meaningful ways, but not at the expense of financial stability we're working to establish. Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Are you saying you can't fulfill the financial commitments we've already discussed? The venue deposit has been paid. Invitations are being printed next week. We're saying we need to redefine those commitments based on actual resources rather than appearances we've been struggling to maintain, my father replied, his tone gentle but firm. We can contribute $15,000 toward your wedding. Expenses. That represents significant portion of proceeds from downsizing, but remains within responsible planning parameters. The figure, while generous by most standards, represented substantial reduction from previous implicit promises and cultural expectations for parents of James's socioeconomic background. Victoria's expression reflected immediate recognition of this discrepancy, her mental calculations of budgetary implications visible in momentary distress quickly concealed behind social poise. James set down his wine glass with careful control that barely contained building tension. This seems conveniently timed given deposits already paid and arrangements already confirmed. What exactly are we supposed to do about commitments made based on your previous assurances? We understand the timing is problematic, my mother acknowledged. We should have had this conversation months ago. Our delayed transparency has created unnecessary complications for your planning process. The question remains how we're supposed to address thousands in venue and catering deposits already paid, Victoria interjected, her professional problem-solving approach asserting itself through emotional reaction, not to mention outstanding contracts with photographers, florists, and musicians selected to create the experience we discussed extensively. My father leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact with both of them. We recognize these practical challenges and want to work cooperatively toward solutions. The $15,000 we can contribute remains available for whichever expenses you consider highest priority. Beyond that, several options exist, scaling back certain elements, adjusting guest count, considering alternative venues that might refund deposits if you explain changed circumstances. Or you could contribute from your own professional incomes, I suggested quietly. You both have successful careers with substantial compensation. Most couples today fund significant portions of their weddings themselves. James's expression darkened at my comment. Easy perspective from someone who hasn't been involved in any of the planning or expectations. Actually, Victoria interrupted, surprising everyone with her shift in tone. Eleanor makes valid point we should consider. She turned toward my brother with remarkable adaptability. James, we've been proceeding with planning based on traditional expectations rather than current realities. Perhaps we should reevaluate our approach given this new information. Her unexpected flexibility created momentary pause in the conversation's mounting tension. Victoria's practical intelligence, quality that had initially attracted my brother, despite our parents' reservations about their relationship pace, now demonstrated itself in capacity to adjust to changed parameters, rather than simply reacting with disappointment or accusation. We've been planning celebration that reflects certain assumptions about family resources, she continued thoughtfully. If those assumptions no longer apply, we have professional and personal capacity to adapt accordingly. She reached for James's hand with deliberate gesture of partnership. The important element isn't specific venue or particular design aesthetic. It's creating meaningful beginning to our marriage with people who matter in our lives. My brother's expression reflected complex response to her unexpected perspective, surprise at her adaptation, lingering resentment about changed financial expectations, reluctant recognition of necessary adjustments. His struggle with these competing reactions played visibly across features usually carefully controlled in family interactions. I was counting on certain elements that now seem impossible, he finally said, disappointment evident despite efforts to moderate his tone. The lake club venue, specifically, the honeymoon location we've discussed, these weren't arbitrary preferences but significant components of how I envisioned our wedding experience. I understand, my father replied with genuine empathy rather than defensive reaction. Adjusting expectations you've invested in emotionally is legitimately difficult. We're not asking you to abandon those visions entirely, just to recalibrate how they might be achieved given actual resources rather than appearances we can no longer maintain. The conversation continued with gradually decreasing tension, evolving from initial shock and disappointment toward practical problem-solving approaches. Victoria demonstrated surprising adaptability, already considering alternative venues that might preserve essential elements while reducing overall expense. James struggled more visibly with emotional adjustment, his disappointment occasionally emerging as passive-aggressive commentary before recognition of reality reasserted itself. Throughout this evolution, my parents maintained consistent approach, acknowledging their role in creating unrealistic expectations, expressing genuine desire to support within sustainable parameters, refusing to revert to previous patterns of financial overextension to avoid discomfort. Their unified presentation reflected significant growth in both individual accountability and partnership alignment. My role emerged naturally as occasional perspective provider rather than active participant, offering context about changing wedding norms when appropriate, suggesting practical resources for budget-conscious celebration elements, maintaining supportive presence without attempting to manage emotional responses. This balanced involvement demonstrated our evolving family dynamics, interdependent rather than enmeshed, supportive without inappropriate responsibility assumption. By evening's conclusion, tentative plan had formed. James and Victoria would research alternative venues that might accommodate their guest list at reduced cost. My parents would contribute their defined financial support toward deposit transfers and priority elements. The wedding date would remain unchanged, but certain peripheral elements would be reconsidered or eliminated entirely. As they prepared to leave, Victoria surprised me with genuine embrace rather than social performance gesture. "Thank you for supporting your parents through difficult transition," she said quietly. "That couldn't have been easy, especially given holiday exclusion you experienced." Her acknowledgement, direct rather than deflected, appreciative rather than defensive, reflected emotional intelligence I hadn't previously recognized behind her polished exterior. Perhaps my brother's choice of partner contained depths I had prematurely dismissed based on superficial indicators and accelerated relationship timeline. James's farewell proved more complex, lingering resentment about changed expectations competing with reluctant recognition of necessary adaptations. His embrace combined genuine connection with vestigial tension, his parting comments reflecting measured acceptance rather than enthusiastic adjustment. "We'll figure this out," he told our parents with determined pragmatism. "The wedding won't be exactly what we envisioned, but we'll create something meaningful within new parameters." The statement reflected both continued disappointment and beginning acceptance, imperfect but authentic response to evening's revelations. My parents acknowledged this balanced reaction with appropriate appreciation, neither demanding unrealistic enthusiasm nor accepting inappropriate resentment. After their departure, the three of us settled in the living room with digestives, my father's traditional conclusion to significant family gatherings. The familiar ritual provided comforting framework for processing the evening's emotional complexity. "That went better than I anticipated," my mother observed, sipping amaretto thoughtfully. "Difficult, certainly, but fundamentally productive." "Victoria surprised me," my father added. Her adaptability and practical approach proved more constructive than I expected. James struggled more visibly with adjustment, but that's consistent with established patterns. "He's had different experiences with financial reality," I noted, neither accusatory nor defensive, simply observational. "His expectations have been shaped by consistent parental accommodation that's no longer sustainable. Adjustment requires both practical recalibration and identity revision." My father nodded thoughtfully. "Perceptive analysis." His self-concept has incorporated certain lifestyle expectations we inadvertently reinforced through previous patterns. Tonight challenged not just wedding plans, but deeper assumptions about entitlement and support, which represents necessary, though uncomfortable growth opportunity, my mother concluded. Similar to what we've been experiencing these past months, though catalyzed differently. Their balanced assessment impressed me, neither minimizing the evening's emotional challenges nor catastrophizing normal adjustment difficulties. This measured perspective represented significant evolution from previous tendencies toward either conflict avoidance or relationship rupture when expectations shifted. "Your presence made difference tonight, Eleanor," my father acknowledged. "Not through active intervention, but through witnessed accountability. Having you there changed conversational dynamics in constructive ways. The last few months have changed many dynamics, I observed. Financial necessity catalyzed transformations that comfort would never have inspired. Necessity certainly initiated changes, my mother agreed. But continuation and deepening have required intentional commitment beyond mere crisis response. We're creating something new together, not just reacting to circumstances beyond our control. Her distinction resonated with my own experience of our evolving family system. The mortgage payment crisis had indeed forced acknowledgement of financial reality previously avoided, but subsequent relationship development reflected deliberate choices rather than mere situational adaptation. As evening concluded and I prepared to leave, my father walked me to my car, as had been his custom throughout my adult visits home. The familiar ritual carried different emotional texture now, connection between equals rather than parental authority. Accompanying child. "I've been thinking about those cherry trees," he said as we paused beside my vehicle. "Their blossoms have been particularly magnificent this spring." "I noticed that earlier," I replied. "Perfect timing for potential buyers to see the property at its best." "Beyond marketing advantage," he clarified, "I've been reconsidering my attachment to them. I planted those trees expecting to enjoy them indefinitely, to control their environment, and witness their entire life cycle. That expectation has clearly changed with our housing transition." I waited for him to continue, sensing deeper reflection emerging. "But I've realized something important," he said, gazing toward the flowering branches visible from the driveway. "The value isn't in permanent possession or control. It's in the cultivation itself, the attention invested, the growth supported, the beauty created. Whether I personally benefit from future flowering seasons or someone else does seems less significant than the fact that the cultivation occurred at all." The observation carried meaning beyond horticultural investment, its metaphorical implications extending to parenting, relationship development, and life investments generally. My father had always communicated most effectively through indirect parallels rather than explicit emotional declarations. "That perspective seems applicable beyond cherry trees," I suggested, honoring his metaphorical approach rather than demanding more direct expression. "Indeed," he acknowledged with small smile, "to relationships particularly. The cultivation matters more than possession or control, something I'm learning rather late, but hopefully not too late." The simple statement carried significant weight, acknowledgement of previous control patterns, recognition of relationship cultivation as worthwhile despite uncertain outcomes, acceptance of continued growth rather than finalized achievement. This balanced perspective represented genuine maturation in his approach to both family connections and life transitions generally. "Never too late for important realizations," I replied, embracing him briefly before entering my car. Driving home through darkness illuminated by occasional streetlights, I reflected on the evening's unfolding and its place within our family's continuing evolution. The wedding conversation had proceeded imperfectly but productively. Difficult truths acknowledged, necessary adjustments initiated, relationships maintained despite expectation revisions. My brother's journey toward financial reality acceptance had just begun, his adjustment necessarily different from my own, given our distinct experiences within the family system. Victoria had demonstrated unexpected adaptability that suggested potential for genuine partnership beyond superficial alignment. My parents had maintained balanced accountability without either excessive self-recrimination or responsibility deflection. Most significantly, we had navigated challenging interaction without resorting to previous dysfunctional patterns, neither conflict avoidance through financial overextension nor relationship rupture through rigid confrontation. The conversation had reflected imperfect but authentic engagement with complex reality rather than comfortable but unsustainable fiction. As I arrived home, Daniel's text message awaited. How did the wedding conversation go? Need decompression support or celebration? Of survival? His balanced inquiry reflected understanding of the evening's potential outcomes, without assumption about specific emotional response required. This openness to authentic experience, rather than predetermined reaction, represented quality I increasingly valued in our relationship. Both, I replied, smiling at our familiar response pattern. Complex but fundamentally constructive. Family system evolving imperfectly but genuinely. Details when you're free. His immediate response. Doors open whenever you arrive. Tea already steeping. The simple message conveyed everything necessary. Availability without expectation. Support without requirement. Connection without performance. After evening navigating complex family dynamics with their inevitable emotional undercurrents, this straightforward offering of presence without agenda felt particularly precious. Tomorrow would bring practical continuations, work responsibilities, follow-up conversations, ongoing adaptations to evolving circumstances. But tonight had demonstrated essential truth about our family's transformation journey. The path forward contained both difficulty and possibility, neither naive optimism about instant change nor cynical dismissal of genuine progress. Like my father's cherry trees, relationships required ongoing cultivation without guarantee of specific outcomes. The value lay not in perfect blossoming according to predetermined expectations, but in continued attention to growth possibilities, regardless of seasonal variations or environmental challenges. That perspective itself, balanced, realistic, hopeful without denial, represented significant harvest from recent months of difficult but necessary transformation. April arrived with a surprising development. My parents' home received multiple offers within 24 hours of the listing going live, culminating in a bidding war that pushed the final sales price significantly above their asking figure. The expedited closing timeline, requested by buyers relocating for employment, compressed what they had anticipated as a 3-month transition into just 5 weeks. This accelerated schedule created both practical challenges and emotional intensification. Physical sorting and packing suddenly required immediate attention rather than gradual processing. Decisions about what to keep versus discard demanded prompt resolution rather than thoughtful consideration. The psychological adjustment to leaving their home of 35 years compressed into a timeline that allowed minimal space for gradual acceptance. I received the news via phone call from my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. The closing is scheduled for May 2nd, she explained, her voice reflecting both excitement about the favorable financial outcome and apprehension about the compressed timeline. We need to be completely moved out by then. Your father and I have found a townhouse in Riverview Commons to lease while we search for a permanent downsized option. That's incredibly fast, I observed, already mentally rearranging my calendar to provide maximum support during their transition. Do you have professional movers lined up? The real estate agent recommended a company that specializes in senior relocations, she replied. They're sending a consultant tomorrow to help create systematic approach to the process. But Eleanor, there's something specific we wanted to ask you. Her tone shifted toward deliberate casualness that immediately signaled significant underlying request. My mother had always employed this verbal technique when approaching potentially sensitive topics, a pattern I recognized from countless previous interactions. We've been thinking that we should have some kind of farewell gathering before leaving. The house, she continued, nothing elaborate, just an opportunity for meaningful closure after so many years of memories. We wondered if you might help coordinate something appropriate. The request represented notable shift from previous family patterns. Traditionally, my parents had managed all entertaining independently, maintaining clear division between host and guest roles, even with immediate family members. Asking for my involvement in planning significant occasion indicated both practical acknowledgement of their current overwhelm and deeper relational evolution toward collaborative rather than hierarchical interaction. I'd be happy to help, I assured her. What kind of gathering are you envisioning? Something intimate rather than expansive, she replied. Close friends and family rather than general social circle. Focused on appreciation and transition rather than elaborate entertainment. Your father suggested simple afternoon reception on the last Sunday before closing, but we're open to other approaches. Her description reflected changing priorities, meaningful connection rather than social impression management, authentic engagement rather than performance hosting. This evolution aligned with broader shifts in their approach to both relationships and resource allocation following financial recalibration. That sounds perfect, I agreed. I'll draft some ideas and coordinate with you both on details. And I'll adjust my schedule to help with packing and organization beyond the gathering itself. Thank you, Eleanor. The relief in her voice was palpable. This transition feels both necessary and overwhelming simultaneously. Having your support makes significant difference. After ending the call, I immediately texted Daniel about our changed weekend plans. His response reflected characteristic adaptability. Of course, we'll help with their move. I've got portable storage containers from Conservation Project that might be useful for organizing. Also, professional-grade packing materials left from equipment shipment. His practical offerings extended beyond mere moral support to tangible resources that would facilitate the process. This concrete assistance without qualification or complaint exemplified quality I increasingly valued in our relationship. Generous partnership expressed through action rather than merely verbal reassurance. Throughout the following weeks, I divided my time between professional responsibilities and supporting my parents' accelerated transition. Evenings and weekends found me at their home, helping sort through decades of accumulated possessions. The process proved both physically demanding and emotionally complex, as each category of items triggered specific memories and attachment considerations. My father approached the sorting with unexpected practicality. His previous reluctance to release cherished possessions evolved into more balanced assessment of actual value versus sentimental attachment. I've been reading about Japanese concept of tsukumogami, he explained, while methodically evaluating workshop tools. The belief that objects develop souls after long service. It provides framework for honoring items' contributions while still making necessary decisions about future utility. This philosophical approach represented significant departure from his previous attachment patterns. Traditional American consumer culture had shaped his relationship with possessions as markers of achievement and status. His emerging perspective reflected more nuanced understanding of meaning beyond materiality, objects valued for memories and contributions rather than representations of success or wealth. My mother's approach differed, but showed similar evolution. Her sorting focused on future functionality within significantly reduced space parameters. No point keeping items that won't serve actual purpose in our next chapter, she observed while evaluating kitchen equipment. Better these things support someone else's daily needs than sit unused in expensive storage. This practical perspective represented genuine shift from previous emphasis on maintaining appearances regardless of utility. Her willingness to release possessions that had once defined her homemaking identity demonstrated growing comfort with authenticity over impression management. My brother participated sporadically in the sorting process, his involvement limited by both professional commitments and emotional resistance to the transition. When present, he focused primarily on selecting childhood mementos and family heirlooms, rather than assisting with general organization. Victoria joined him occasionally, her practical efficiency providing welcome counterbalance to his selective engagement. Throughout these preparations, I continued developing plans for the farewell gathering my parents had requested. After consultation with Daniel, whose event planning experience with conservation fundraisers provided valuable perspective, I created concept that honored the house itself as central character in our family story. What if we frame the gathering as tribute to the home's role in nurturing connections? I suggested during planning conversation with my parents. Each room could feature simple documentation of significant memories that occurred in that space. Photographs, brief written recollections, meaningful objects temporarily displayed. Guests could move through at their own pace, adding their memories through conversation or written notes. My parents embraced this approach immediately, their enthusiasm reflecting genuine alignment with emerging values rather than mere appreciation. For reduced planning burden, together we selected representative photographs spanning decades of family life, holiday gatherings, milestone celebrations, ordinary moments captured in specific spaces throughout the house. These images, supplemented with simple contextual notes, would create memory pathway for guests to follow during the reception. The gathering itself unfolded on a perfect spring afternoon, sunshine illuminating the property's manicured landscaping and flowering trees. Approximately 30 people attended, closest friends who had shared significant experiences in the home, extended family members with meaningful connections to the space, neighbors who had created community alongside my parents for decades. My father greeted guests at the entrance, providing simple explanation of the event's structure, while directing them toward initial refreshments in the dining room. My mother circulated throughout the house, engaging individuals in targeted conversation that elicited specific memories associated with various spaces. I managed logistical elements while facilitating intergenerational connections between longtime family friends and younger attendees. Daniel photographed the event with characteristic unobtrusive skill, capturing authentic moments rather than posed groupings. His artistic sensitivity transformed ordinary interactions into compelling visual narratives, my father describing workshop projects to appreciative audience, my mother embracing longtime neighbor with genuine emotion, my brother unexpectedly engaged in animated conversation with family friends who had witnessed his childhood achievements. The memory stations throughout the house inspired precisely the reflective engagement we had intended. Guests lingered over photographs documenting holiday celebrations in the formal living room, impromptu gatherings on the back patio, ordinary family meals in the kitchen nook. Their observations and additions created collaborative narrative of the home's significance beyond mere physical structure. I remember when this dining room table hosted 15 teenagers cramming for final exams. Our neighbor Martin recalled, pointing to photograph of much younger James surrounded by study materials. Your mother kept bringing sandwiches and encouraging breaks without ever complaining about the noise level. The sunroom was where our garden club always gathered, Georgia, my mother's longtime friend, noted while adding written memory to collection. Something about that light made everyone's ideas seem more vibrant and possible. These shared recollections transformed physical spaces into repositories of collective experience, highlighting the home's role as container for connection rather than merely impressive architectural structure. The gathering's focus on memories, rather than material value, aligned perfectly with my parents' evolving perspective on meaning beyond possession. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.